A very good evening. Thank you for joining us here on this Monday. You're watching India Tonight. I'm Nivedna Prabhu, and joining me is my colleague Sumita Karir. Clearly, lots to be talking about, Sumita, this evening.
Absolutely, Nivedna. In fact, tensions are escalating in India-US trade relations as President Donald Trump's administration intensifies its rhetoric and actions against India. On July the 30th, Trump announced a 25% tariff on Indian goods effective August 1. He cited India's high tariffs on American products and its continued purchase of Russian oil and military equipment. Trump even went as far as calling India and Russia quote-unquote dead economies in a Truth Social post that signaled a hardline stance to pressure India over its trade ties with Moscow amidst the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Nivedna.
Absolutely. In fact, as you put that into perspective as well, Sumita, let's also tell our viewers that Stephen Miller, Trump's deputy chief of staff, doubled down on Sunday, accusing India of financing Russia's war in Ukraine by purchasing its oil, claiming India's imports rival China's. Now, Miller's remarks underscored the administration's frustration, though he noted Trump's tremendous relationship with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Trump has also threatened a staggering 100% tariff on countries buying Russian oil unless Moscow agrees to a peace deal with Ukraine, raising the stakes for India, which relies on Russia for 35% of its oil imports. Now, in response, Prime Minister Modi, speaking in Kashi, called for a renewed push for Swadeshi and Make in India, urging citizens and businesses to prioritize locally made products to bolster economic self-reliance amid global uncertainty. Now, Modi emphasized protecting India's interests as it aims to become the world's third largest economy without directly naming the US, Sumita.
Absolutely, Nivedna. And in fact, to talk to us more about where India-US relations are headed, we're now joined by Arun Kumar Singh. He's a former Indian ambassador to the United States. Thank you very much, Mr. Singh, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now. Clearly, lots to talk about, given the fact that, there is a trade deal that's currently being negotiated. And then we also see the narrative that's building up so far as Trump's commentary is concerned. So according to you, where do India-US ties stand as of now, given Trump's invective and this very latest announcement of very high 25% tariffs?
So clearly, we are going through a difficult phase, but this is not something new. We've had difficult phases in the India-US relationship earlier also. Now, even if I go back only to 2000, that's when the new phase in the relationship started. Because before that, in 1998, US had sanctioned India very severely after we had done the nuclear test that year. But after 2000, they started the new phase in the region. But even then, from time to time, there were disappointments. I recall in 2016, when we had a good relationship, when the Obama administration was about to declare India as a major defense partner. In February that year, they suddenly decided to give 80 F-16 aircraft to Pakistan, ostensibly on counterterrorism grounds, whereas we all know that Pakistan uses them only against India. It was only the US Congress, based on active lobbying done by India, that blocked that sale. So we've had these challenges in the past. And even in the Trump administration, if you remember, in 2017 and 2018, President Trump severely criticized Pakistan and said, stop all aid to Pakistan. But in 2019, he invited Imran Khan to the White House and in response to a planted question said that he was ready to meet and went on to say that the Indian Prime Minister had asked him to mediate on Australia. And this simply could not be true. And the Indian Foreign Minister later had to make a statement in Parliament to say that there was no truth to what the President had said. So here we have a leader of a major country who is not always conditioned by facts when he takes a position or articulates a policy position. So that's the challenge. So at the moment, there are some differences. The language that has been used against India is something that obviously going to irritate the people in India, the policymakers, and the fact of 25% tariffs. So I think the US also needs to understand that India has its own compulsions to stay firm to what it believes is in its interest, and they will work to structure their relationship in that manner. So I would say that, yes, deal with the challenge, but be mindful of the longer-term interest in the relationship. Because despite the fact that China has risen tremendously, US remains the preeminent global power still. And we have deep economic and technology partnerships. US is India's largest trading partner, is the largest source of foreign direct investment in India. largest single country presence of Indian origin diaspora. And at 300,000, the largest single country presence of Indian students in US universities. So if you look at comprehensive national interest, US is certainly an important partner for India.
Right, sir.
So we have to keep that in mind.
Right, Mr. Singh, as you point that out and make imperative points as well. In the other sense, are these comments just to have a deal finalized on with India? Given, if you were to look at it the other way, how's Trump looking at India as an ally in his second term?
Look, first, India never looks for alliances. Right? We don't like to be called any country ally. I mean, we talk about partnerships, strategic partnerships. And clearly, the way President Trump has been defining his role in his second term, he has been coercive. He has been very unilateral in terms of defining how he sees as his political interest, gaining a certain image for himself in the US. And it's just not India. There have been reports that leaders in Japan have not been very happy with the way he's addressed the trade issue with them. There has been negative reaction in Europe. But because the US economy is so strong, and because the economies of these countries or organizations are linked to the US economy in a very major way, they've been compelled to make compromises that they're not comfortable with. So that's the situation we are dealing with. So I don't think there's so much as Trump being anti-India in itself. He's looking at what works for him politically. And he would like to convey the image that every country is giving in to his trade and tariff demands. And obviously, India has to look at its own interests.
Right, Ambassador, since you talk about these unwarranted comments, Trump and very recently Stephen Miller, they've made comments around India buying Russian military and oil. They're not really very happy about that. And repeated remarks have been made from Donald Trump's side, although a clarification has been made from India's oil minister, the MEA as well. So is Donald Trump essentially, when he makes these comments with respect to India buying Russian energy and military, is he trying to drive a wedge between India and Russia ties, or is it just about trade?
So I think it has many dimensions. You would recall that in the Biden administration also, the US was not particularly happy about India buying oil from Russia. And India explained that India was doing it because of its own interests and energy needs. And they understood it. As the US Secretary of State said in 2022, that US understands India's compulsions related to Russia. The India-Russia relationship developed at a time when the US was not willing to be that kind of a partner. And the National Security Advisor said, Jake Sullivan, that with India, we are playing the long game. So that was the approach. I think today what has happened is that President Trump is somewhat frustrated that what he wanted to do with Russia, he's not been able to achieve. Because he said that within 24 hours, the Russia-Ukraine conflict will come to an end. That he will speak to President Putin and the conflict will be resolved. Now, that has not happened because there are objective differences that just cannot be resolved on the basis of personalities. And Russia has shown tremendous resilience despite very severe Western and US sanctions. So because they have not succeeded, now they're looking for others to blame. And that has been standard US policy. When your objective not achieved, you can't say that your policy has failed or the objectives set by your leaders are achievable. You blame someone else. So I think they are trying to divert it by saying that India is buying a significant amount from Russia, therefore is funding Russia's war effort. But whatever India has been buying has been within the price cap that US and Europe had set. And then India has been picking up from the spot market, depending on what is available at the most competitive price. So India has to address its energy requirement. So I don't think they can drive a wedge between India and Russia because Russia relationship is a historical relationship.
Absolutely, Ambassador. But even though, given the aspect of what we were talking about, India has clarified its stance on energy needs. Do you see a situation where it perhaps might lead to India buying more of US energy? Is that how you look at it?
Look, we'll have to watch. And I think clearly it is in India's interest to diversify its purchases. Because what US current actions have shown that even vis-a-vis the US, you must have leverage. And you must have countervailing power. You cannot become too dependent on the US either, because the policies can change, like the Japanese are feeling a challenge or the Europeans are feeling a challenge. So I don't think India, although in principle India would want to diversify, it would certainly not want to be seen to be diversifying under pressure. Because if you're seen as giving into pressure at any point of time, then those generating pressure will generate additional pressure on other issues. So they have to understand that eventually India will take its own call based on assessment of its wider interests. And that is the kind of country that India has been for decades. And that's the basis, I think, largely on which India has defined its foreign policy since it became independent.
Absolutely, Ambassador, and that clarification came just last week from the Ministry of External Affairs, once again, that India's energy needs, where it sources, energy, oil, or even its military for that matter, that will not be dictated by, any one particular country and whether it dislikes it or not. But let me ask you, given the fact that we're in the midst of negotiations, India and the United States, looking at perhaps arriving at some sort of an arrangement before fall of 2025, but do you see that a deal perhaps is possible, an interim trade deal or a final deal is possible by the fall of 2025?
No, I certainly think a deal is possible because you would recall that India was among the first countries with which US in Trump 2.0 started discussions on a trade agreement. In fact, in the Indian budget in February, preemptively, some concessions were offered on items that would be of export interest to the US. So India really wanted to be a step ahead. When the Indian Prime Minister visited US in February this year, in the joint statement, there was a reference the two would work towards a multi-sectoral free trade agreement.
Right.
And so again, with the very first countries. And the negotiators have had many rounds of discussions. I believe 5 in-person discussions, more than 40 virtual discussions. And then there are reports that the US team could be coming in the second half of August to continue discussions. So I think it is possible for the two teams to remain professionally engaged and work out a multi-sectoral bilateral agreement that works for both sides, not just for one side. So it is certainly doable, but I think the US team, once they absorb, and the US leadership, that India doesn't buckle under pressure, that India will be looking at a balance of interests, and that this is the best way to go forward with India. And they have also an interest in not disrupting the India relationship. They would certainly want to generate pressure. That's something the US system is very oriented towards doing vis-a-vis all the countries. But they would not want to disrupt the India relationship, either in the context of China or in terms of US own interests. US wants to maintain its global leadership in technology and innovation. For that, India is a very important partner for them. You see the role of Indian companies, Indian tech workers, Indian CEOs in Silicon Valley. And you have 1,800 global capability centers in India.
Ambassador, taking a cue from what you said, both countries are looking to protect their interests. And one of the aspects is about how the red lines have been drawn as far as India is concerned, maintaining their stance on agriculture as well as dairy. But in your opinion, what kind of concessions can we look at?
So I think this is something for the negotiators to work out. But more than that, I think the focus should not really be just on the issue of concession. The focus should be what kind of an economic relationship you construct and a technology partnership so that new avenues for trade and engagement are opened up. Now, if you go back to the joint statement that was issued in February, it says that the current trade is $200 billion. And the two leaders want to take the trade to $500 billion by 2030. Now, if you want to do that, you're not looking at concessions based on current patterns of production. You are looking at creating new patterns of production and exchanges based on which you expand the trade. Similarly, if you go back to 2023, when the United States and India launched this initiative on partnership on critical and emerging technologies, AI, quantum, cyber, 6G, biotech, semiconductors, defense, space. And the idea was through these, you do technology partnership, leading to new forms of production sharing. And based on that, you do new trading arrangements. That's how we expand. So I think it would be much more productive to look at that kind of a future and potential partnership rather than just concessions based on existing patterns of production.
Right, In fact, this is a relationship that has stood the test of time. And in fact, it has gone from strength to strength, and it hasn't really been dependent on which administration has been in power. But I have to ask you this very important question that pertains to Pakistan and how that dynamic is developing. That's for everybody to see. First, Donald Trump hyphenated India and Pakistan despite a clarification given by the Indian leadership. He still continues to do so. There is also a deal in place now. So Donald Trump, will he keep that irritant alive in ties, and to reach what end? What is essentially United States, or rather Trump's end goal or strategy for Pakistan?
I think first thing we in India have to do is not get shocked by whatever happens in US-Pakistan relations. Because the fact is, no country takes a foreign policy decision to help another country. They take it based on their perception of their own interest or the political compulsion of their political leaders. And so that's something we have to understand. Now, if we look at Pakistan, US has used Pakistan in the 60s, 70s, when it was a military ally against the Soviet Union. US then used Pakistan to build militant jihad to drive the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan between 1979 and 1989. US needed Pakistan again after 2001, when there were US troops present in Afghanistan, and to give them supplies, because US could not send supplies through Iran, so had it sent it through Pakistan. And continuously, US has felt that it needs to engage with the Pakistan leaders because of wanting some form of counterterrorism cooperation, and they want access to the leadership of a country that has nuclear weapons. And so that is going to stay. And so there's never really been what I would say a convergence in terms strategically, in terms of how US looks at Pakistan and how India looks at Pakistan. But from time to time, there have been difficulties in US-Pakistan relationship for their own reasons, not related to India. So I don't think we should get too excited about that, and not too worried when the US-Pakistan relationship starts getting in a more positive direction. Just because the US leadership wants to take it in that direction, they will do that. So I think we have to focus more on what is the convergence between US and India, and how do we strengthen that convergence over time so that we are able to deal with any challenges that develop in the US-Pakistan relationship. So something like that, the positive framework has happened in US-Pakistan relations earlier. It will happen also in the future.
Right, Ambassador, on that note, I want to thank you for taking the time out, joining us here on ET Now, not only sharing with us your perspective, but what we believe has also been a deeply insightful conversation as well. We look forward to having you on the show once again, but for the moment, that's all that we have the time for on this edition.